Okay, so this video is going to be on the reproductive anatomy of the cats. And what we have here on the left is a female cat, and on the right is going to be the male cat that we're going to use to go through this dissection and point out all the structures. So we're going to begin with the female cat. And so, of course, the first thing you want to do on both of these, or whatever you see on your exam as images, is to identify, of course, right away if it's a male or female before you can start identifying the actual specific structures. So the first thing we can do before we dive into the actual female is look at the two of them, and we can find some pretty distinguishing characteristics. A lot of them are pretty obvious, which you may already know. All right, so the first one is if we're looking at the female, so if it isn't immediately obvious to you from external cues or structures, what we can do is once you open up the abdomen of the cat, you'll typically see in females, you'll see these two horns or branches that are kind of sticking out. You can see another one's going into there. All right, so you can see these two branching structures that are sticking out. And if you look closely, you can see that there's a roughly ovoid structure at the end of them, all right? And so essentially what we're looking at is this is an extension of the uterus of the cat, and there's an ovary right there at the end. So this is one clear indication, is if you move the bladder down, if you kind of fold it downwards and you see this kind of branched structure coming out, that's going to be the ovaries of the cat. Now, of course, if we look at the males, there are a couple obvious external structures. You can see the testes down here, which we've dissected. But for some reason, if you did not have those in sight of either the image or video that you might be looking at, one thing to do if you can see the inside of the abdomen of the cat is to fold the bladder down this way. And you'll notice that this is right here is the abdominal wall that's basically been cut and kind of folded down. And coming out of a hole right here in the abdominal wall, you can see that there's going to be a typical structure that will actually sort of bend around and it will loop around behind the bladder. And there's another one you can see on this side that's right here. So that's another indication that we're looking at a male. If you fold down the bladder, you'll see these two structures looping behind the bladder. These are actually the vas deferens. So that's one clear indicator. All right, so let's go back to the female anatomy. So we can identify a number of structures that we can see in the female. So one thing we can do is kind of start at the top and work our way down. So like we mentioned, this right here is a really clear view of an ovary. All right, so that is the left ovary. And you can actually see right here that I'm kind of tracing, this is going to be that fallopian tube. And the structure right here leading down from that fallopian tube, this is going to be a uterine horn. So this is all an extension of the uterus of the cat. All right. And if we look at the other side, we can also see a similar structure. So this right here is another uterine horn. And as you can see, we can follow that to the end where we see our ovary right there. All right, and then our fallopian tube is actually sitting just behind the ovary. So you can see that there's a little bit of what might look like a tube right here. That's just a ligament that's holding the ovary to that uterine horn. All right, so there's a fallopian tube that goes right around the back here. Uterine horn going down. And where the two uterine horns meet, you can see right here is where they start to meet. This is all called the uterine body. All right, and if we fold this back up, so we're covering that up with the bladder, you can see that that uterine body is right here. And at the base of that uterine body, this is where that vaginal tract begins. All right, so this is all the vagina, and the vaginal tract is going to continue down until right about here, you can see, it's actually going to merge with this urethra coming off of the bladder. So this point right there with which they merge, everything after that, so this whole area below it is called the urogenital sinus. And so this is one kind of main difference, aside from a couple other ones that you may have already noticed, that distinguishes female reproduction in cats versus humans. So humans do not have this this urogenital sinus. This is something that we see in cats, but not humans. All right, so that is basically it for the reproductive structures on the female cat that we would expect you to identify. So again, we have the ovaries, the fallopian tube, the uterine horn, and the same structures on the other side. We have that uterine body where the two uterine horns are coming together. And we have the vaginal tract going down until it merges with the urethra. And then below that, that becomes the urogenital sinus. Alright, so if we switch gears to the male cat, alright, we can see, of course, the two testes here. And this is actually a really nice view because what we can see is this is a testis right here on the other side of the probe. So this is the testis, this is where sperm production is initiated. And then you can see the structure right here that's kind of wrapping around the edge. This is the epididymis, and this is the site of where sperm is maturing. And it's being sent at the end of the epididymis, it leaves through the vas deferens. And you can see right here that it's starting to leave through this kind of tubule-like structure. This is actually called the spermatic cord. So that spermatic cord is going in towards the abdominal cavity. And inside the spermatic cord, of course, is this vas deferens, but also the spermatic artery, the spermatic vein, and some nerves. Now if we look over here, we can also see the testis, and we can see the epididymis that's kind of wrapping around this other side. And so the epididymis is just back here. Another thing that we notice, of course, again, is the spermatic cord that's leaving, again, carrying the vas deferens, the spermatic vein, the spermatic artery, and the nerves to go along with it. Alright, so another thing that we'll notice, right, is, so we have the spermatic cord going in towards the abdominal cavity. And if we look up here, again, this is the abdominal wall that we folded down. And we'll actually see, if we look at the inside of the abdominal wall, there's a little hole where we can see the contents of that spermatic cord are actually entering the abdomen. So this hole right here that everything's coming out of, this is a canal right here that the probe is in, and that's called the inguinal canal. And so that spermatic cord runs inwards towards the abdominal cavity, and it goes through the abdominal wall, through this inguinal canal. And you can see right here the spermatic artery and the spermatic vein, as well as the nerves that are coming out of that inguinal canal. And you can see the spermatic artery just continues to run upwards. So all of those, the spermatic vein, spermatic artery, and the nerves, those continue to run upwards along this tract here. But you can see the vas deferens branches out, and this again was a structure that we mentioned that loops behind the bladder. So this is all the vas deferens. And in humans, this is a structure that's actually severed during a vasectomy. Alright, so let me focus this a little bit more. So you can see that the vas deferens is looping around to the back of the, or behind the bladder. The other one is over here, doing the same thing. So what we can do now is if we fold that bladder upwards to kind of its normal position, right, we can see the urethra coming down right here from the bladder. And essentially what happens is we have the vas deferens, again, that's, if I can pull this down, that's looping behind that bladder. And that vas deferens is essentially merging into the urethra right around where the prostate gland is. So this is all the urethra. And you can see right here there's a little bit of an expansion where the urethra widens. This is right where the prostate gland is. And we have that vas deferens running down, and it essentially becomes the ejaculatory duct inside of this prostate gland. Alright, so this widening is where the prostate gland is on the cat. And then way down here, it's a little bit hard to see. Let's see if I can focus on here. You can see those little nodules right there on either side. Alright, so there's a little one right there at the tip of this probe, and there's another one right here. Those are going to be the bulbourethral glands, which are also called the Cowper's glands. Alright, so again we have urethra, prostate gland, and then we have these two really small bulbourethral glands towards the end of that urethra. And of course right here, when the urethra, once it leaves the abdominal wall, this right here is going to be the penis of the cat. Alright, so that is all of the structures for the reproduction for the male and for the female cat anatomy. So as usual, please rewatch this video so that you can get the structures down. Use the mastering website through the Practice Anatomy Lab to help you identify the structures. And don't be afraid to use other online resources. All right, so use image searches. Make sure you can find other examples of this so you can see some variation. In the back of your lab manuals, there are dissection images for reproduction, so check those out as well. And again, as usual, feel free to contact your TAs or me during our online office hours if you have any questions.